from Sandyford Business District, and you're all very welcome to Wellness Week. This is a third day of Wellness Week, and it's themed Wellness Wednesday. This year we've had record numbers, and it's great to see so many people from in the district and outside Sandyford Business District join us. For those joining for the first time, Sandyford Business District is the largest business improvement district on the island of Ireland. It has 5,000 residents, 26,000 employees and 1,000 companies. There are 4 business parks: Central Park, South County, Sandyford and Stillorgan. It's a very diverse district with clusters of medtech, fintech, autotech, hospitality, retail and much, much more. I like to describe it as a city within a city. We have recently launched our Spend in Sandyford campaign, and we're asking everyone to get behind businesses in Sandyford Business District and just think about where you're going to spend that euro. Just think about Sandyford Business District and the businesses within Sandyford Business District. Today's event is called Building Resilience and Tackling Everyday Challenges, and I am delighted to welcome the renowned Dr. Eddie Murphy. Dr. Eddie Murphy is a clinical psychologist, associate professor at UCD School of Psychology, and many of you will know him from RTE's Operation Transformation. Dr. Eddie Murphy, you are very welcome, and how have you been getting on during the pandemic?
So yeah, it's lovely to be here, and thanks very much to Sandyford, and apologies for technical difficulties earlier, but I hope you stay with us now for the next half hour or so, and I'm going to talk through many different areas around building resilience and tackling everyday challenges, particularly with the pandemic and COVID and all this new feature in our lives. It's been a struggle at certain times. I put on those COVID kilos. Like many, sleep has got disturbed, and this will come up later on. I have 2 boys, 10 and 12. And I was delighted, if anyone has children, that they saw them trooping back to school in September to bring some normality back in our lives. And I suppose one of the features in our house is my wife is on cancer treatments. And so the reality is that we're very careful too around the key messaging of space, face covering, face, and washing our hands.
Okay. I think you're probably, a lot of people are experiencing some of what you're going through. I have, with kids as well, and, the impact, that has caused, and they don't understand that, mum or dad are at home and they're working because they're just not used to that situation. I found myself the pandemic at times stressful. I've had disturbed sleep, the COVID kilo. I've added COVID kilos, it's been difficult, but I'm looking forward to hearing from you today in terms of how we can manage our emotions and correct those wrongs.
Yeah, so, well, what I'm going to do, so I'm going to just bring us through a whole area of our emotional well-being, or mental fitness. And like many people go to the gym and they work out in their physical fitness, and I similarly go for runs and walks, and but also it's important, I think, in the whole area of our emotional lives and our emotional well-being is around mental fitness as well. And I suppose to take us through some of that, I think it might be helpful to look at what we call our 5 major emotions in our lives, and how, if we can manage these emotions, and I'm going to sit back, put a coffee on, I get it, have a little think. There's a little space for you to maybe pick up some nuggets. And we have these 5 major emotions, and if we can manage these emotions, we're onto a place of managing our emotional wellness. So if you have a guess now, or if you think, what would those 5 major emotions be? If you think of a child under 5, their emotions would be, you could probably get a good sense of those emotions. So sadness would be one, happiness, love, joy, and happiness would be another, anger is another, fear is another, and the last one, have a go, guess. It's a challenging one, disgust. This is our 5th primary emotion. Imagine if you want to check out disgust, get a lemon and ask a 3-year-old to bite it and see the reaction. Of course, now I have a child protection component to me, so we can't be doing that just on lemons. We need to give little bits of ice cream as well. So that we can do a bitter and sweet experiment. So those 5 major emotions are really powerful emotions. As our brain gets more complex, so as we grow older, and our brain gets more complex, our emotions get more complex. So, for example, guilt, shame, being irritable, being frustrated, being zest, being empowered, being and if you notice, then emotions can be described as one word, and that's sort of interesting too. Some people struggle to name their emotions and labeling their emotions. If you have family members, if you have children, some people have children that might be watching this, is that sometimes we can help our children label their emotions because they might struggle to label them. Oh, you're frustrated, or you're irritated, or so that they can accurately name. It's generating an emotional literacy, and that's always a helpful thing to do. And when you look at emotions, then if you take different emotions when they get problematic, so I'm a clinical psychologist, and my background is I work in a health service, and I work in terms of seeing adults and children. It's like a GP of emotional health. And one of the areas is when people get problematic, quite often then they're referred into us, or they refer themselves, or they may come through their employee assistance program. So in terms of when sadness gets problematic, that can become clinical depression or bipolar. So profound or prolonged sadness. And features of clinical depression are like a sustained low mood over, guess how long you have to have sustained low mood for a clinical diagnosis of depression. So as clinicians, we talk all around the world. And when we're using the word depression, we actually mean this. That's the clinical definition of depression. And people often, if I asked you now, how long do you think you have to be depressed for before you get a clinical diagnosis? People might say, oh, it's a couple of months, a couple of weeks, a couple of days, a couple of years, 10 years. It's actually a 2-week period. That's very interesting. A 2-week period of the sustained low mood characterized by change in appetite, change in sleep, sense of feeling guilty, feeling punished, a sense of loss of hope in the future. There's lots of features there in it. It's about 29 to 30 different characteristics. Then it gives us a picture that somebody has a clinical depression. And what's really good and important to know is that for mild to moderate depression, 4 sessions of walking for 40 minutes is the equivalent of antidepressant medication for mild to moderate depression. For severe depression, then it's GP route and support around cognitive behavioral therapy. Maybe medication may play a role in that as well for some individuals. But remember, for mild to moderate, 4 sessions of 40 minutes a week. National Institute of Mental Health, massive study, over 10,000 people. It's incredibly powerful to know that movement is one of our best medicines when it comes to managing our mood. So that's one of the features of when sadness gets awry. So if we can manage our sadness, we are then into a space of being able to, I believe in the whole area of prevention. Prevention is better than getting into, often I see things like in a traffic light model. So red, amber, green, or where would you rate yourself? And nobody wants to, if you're going into the red zone, that you want short visits into the red zone, or if you go into the amber zone, like we do many times, that we go on the roundabout and get back into the green zone. So today is about how we might do that. Fear is another interesting one. So if I now brought a spider into your home environment, if you're working from home, or if you're working at your desk in the office, and if I brought a spider in, or if I brought a snake in, or if I brought a rat in, how would that be? So what's going to get activated there? Something gets really activated. Adrenaline pours into our body. We can go into what's called a fight, flight, and freeze mode. This is our stress response in the fight, flight, and freeze mode. And linked with our fight is our anger response. And linked with our flight is our fear response. And there's a couple of things I want you to think about. There's a profound question that I want you to ask yourself and ask of yourself every so often. What would I do if I was not afraid? What would you do? What would you do if you were not afraid? Because in life, fear holds us back. Anxiety is one of the features of, so when it gets problematic, and as our brains get more complex, it can spiral out into so many different places. It can be stress, toxic stress, chronic stress. It can be panic attacks, which is an overwhelming sense of fear. Panic attacks a lot of people, 1 in 10 people. So if there's 1,000 people looking at this today, there's 100 people, 120 people will have experienced panic attack. It's very common. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health challenge in their life. If that's not you, that could be someone that you're in your family, in your circle, or your friends. So when fear gets problematic, it can start shifting into panic attack, generalized anxiety, that's people who worry all the time, health anxiety, where people have maybe they have a headache and think it's a brain tumor, have a pain in their belly and they think it's like bowel cancer. That's a condition called health anxiety. Social anxiety, where it's a person is shyness. It's the most feared, it's the most common of all the anxiety presentations. Social anxiety, very good website with good help and resources is socialanxietyireland.com. And social anxiety is where a person struggles maybe in a group situation to make a presentation, that's a specific one, or struggling in general in group situations. And quite often they're scanning the environment, concerned. An individual with social anxiety is often concerned about what other people are thinking about them. So it's a bit more than shyness, and it's a lot of stress goes with it. And the good news is there's really good help out there. In Dublin, there's it's gone into a virtual group now, an online CBT program, and check it out on socialanxietyireland.com. So basically, if you think about fear, when it gets problematic, we have panic attacks, generalized anxiety, phobias, OC, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. Fundamentally, they all link back to the emotion of fear. And what do people do when they fear most? And I'll invite you to think about this. And in psychology, we're modern psychology. People often think we go back and look at childhood and events, but actually, what we're really interested in, and if you see my work on TV and that, is while we can't do anything where the problem emerged from, what we can do is what keeps problems going. And this is the key thing in what we try and target. Our thoughts keep our problems going, and our behaviors keep our problem going. And this brings us into the area of cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive is what we think, and behavior is what we do. And when it comes to fear, avoidance will be the behavior that a lot of people do. So a good way of thinking about this, if you're afraid of flying, you don't get on the plane. And that's avoidance. Will always keep the fear going. But we can avoid in life, we can avoid having conversations that we need to have with people. We can avoid having being assertive in places that we need to be assertive. Avoid saying no. Sometimes we say yes when we want to say no. So what would you do if you were not afraid? Very powerful. Try and think about that. It's a question I'd like you to maybe write down, put it on a post-it, put it into there, and it'll trigger, and I would encourage you to think about the opposite of that. So that's fear. That's like when fear gets problematic. Obviously, when anger gets problematic. Now, anger is a normal emotion. We all get angry. So we all get angry, and anger becomes problematic when it hurts either ourselves or hurts others, or the stuff in our environment like furniture or stuff like that. And sometimes people are angry in or angry out. They either suppress or express their anger. And it's the treatment actually we do for anger management is assertiveness. And people are often confused and say, why would you treat someone to be assertive if they're angry? Because with anger, there's a use of power, and the person, it's not about, assertiveness is about a win-win. It's about a communication. You have your needs and I have my needs. And and it's challenging and training somebody. So if you've experienced anger, then assertiveness, there's really good programs on assertiveness. Check them out, they're free, they're online available. I have a book we call Becoming Your Real Self. It's in all the libraries, and it have each of these areas that talk about whether it's anger, anxiety, fear, depression, self-esteem. I've all identify what it is, and then solutions towards it. And it's in the Healthy Ireland section of all public libraries as well. So that's that anger emotion is normal because it can propel us into action. But sometimes when we hold our anger in, it can become toxic to us. And that toxic anger, and one of the areas that I studied was how anger impacts on our heart, actually. And toxic in it, it becomes it's very unhealthy for our heart, because fundamentally we're throwing out a lot of stress hormones, and if they're sustained, not very good in terms of our physical health. Disgust when it's when it goes problematic is in the area of self-confidence, body image. Particularly, it can happen for a lot of younger men and women around the whole area of self-confidence, and the disgust becomes internalized into themselves, and which brings us to an area of like the different types of relationships that we have in our life. We have different relationships, but the key relationship is the one that we have with ourselves. What relationship do we have with ourselves? Our inner voice. Is our inner voice coaching, supporting, nurturing, or is it critical voice? And that's one of the things that we find is that when people come in to see us on one-to-ones, quite often they have a very harsh, punitive internal voice. And we ask about the whole area of trying to switch that voice to be coaching and nurturing. And one of the ways, and this is something else I'd like you to think about as a practical thing, is around having a compassionate voice towards yourself. A compassionate voice. And particularly now we're in this COVID pandemic. And fundamentally, the pandemic is a threat. And people are experiencing levels of stress on top of their existing stress. And because there's a lot of uncertainty, whether around employment, financial security, relationships, it's impacting on different, if you have vulnerable family members, or if you have people in different ages and stages in their life. I believe that for younger people, this pandemic is having an incredible, for children, I believe it's having a generational effect. And for young adults in that early part of their career and life and stuff like that, I think they're being scapegoated. But I actually believe that it's having a significant impact on because we're social beings. Humans are social beings. We want to connect with each other. It's a natural thing to connect. And in a way, we're being asked to disconnect, to keep apart. And that leads, for some people, this leads to an isolation and loneliness. And there was some recent studies, and I've been up to the Sandyford Business Park talking to some of the providers, but there was a Leia healthcare study with over 1,000 employees, different grades. And what they found was that 30% roughly really enjoyed the fact that they're at home and they're home working, but there's another 30% who are really struggling with this. They're more isolated, they feel disconnected from their team. And one of the things about loneliness, and some of them, 30% felt lonely. Now, loneliness, again, is linked to the sadness piece in one of the major powerful moods. I was on the National Loneliness Task Force, and we looked at loneliness. And often you think when it comes to loneliness, you think maybe an older person, man or woman in the West Clare or something like that, isolated in a rural community. But actually what we know about loneliness is it impacts on many different ages, right through, whether you're a new mom or you've relocated into Ireland, whether you've relocated to the city, whether you're a student starting off employment for your first time, whether you're, so it impacts on many different people. So it's not just an older age piece. and it actually creates a stress response. And we get a signal. I'm going to take this signal out. We get a signal when we're hungry. We get a signal to eat. When we're thirsty, we get a signal to drink. So I'm just going to do that. Excuse me. An important self-care moment there. And when we're lonely, that's our human signal for connection, for connecting with somebody else. That's what we want to do. We want to connect with somebody. So, and then what would you do if you weren't afraid? If you weren't afraid, you would then start making and seeking to create that connection. There's a big, powerful thing around the virtual connection. If that's where we're at the moment, then we move into real world connection as well. So I wanted, so in this COVID period, then it's stress. It's created a threat. The threat creates stress, and then we engage in different thinking and different behaviors. Some of the behaviors around that are around scanning. We're looking at the news. We're looking at the latest numbers. We're looking at the second wave. We're looking at the impact of the first wave. We're looking at, we're trying to look at what's happening overseas, and scanning. And in a way, you see, it's important that we get information from trusted news sources. But I believe too that we should just dip in once a day, get our news that we require, but then stop the scanning, because the scanning behavior is an anxiety-based behavior and actually only feeds into the fear. It only feeds the stress. It only feeds the worry and concern and keeps the negative mood going. So, so instead of constant scanning, one dip in. I wouldn't do it towards late at night. I think midday or 6 o'clock, not near our sleep time, because I think that's critically important. And then other things that we need to do, because it's around resetting and recharging. And I talked about, good nutrition. I'm going to tell you, I want to talk a little bit about resilience now. So resilience is our ability to bounce back after adversity. And if you review your life, I've no doubt you've faced adversity before and you've overcome. And the thing about the opposite of sadness is hope. The opposite of depression is hope. One of the things that we really build in terms of people who we're working with, profound sadness, is hope. And there's a hope component to this pandemic as well, that the scientific and medical community are working so hard in terms of therapeutics, preventative strategies, in terms of development of vaccine. And this hope is a critical thing this will pass. This period of time will pass. We'll reflect on it. It will impact on in many different ways, but also it will pass. And it's important to nurture that, to have it, that nugget, and to hold that as well. Even though you're facing adversity, that you have done it before and you will overcome. So the scanning around fake news, the self-care is critically important. What are you doing around your self-care? What does your self-care look like? If you're going to build your resilience and tackle everyday challenges, self-care is a component part of that. The phrase is, you can't pour from an empty cup. You might have all these different roles. You're a worker, you're a lover, you're a father, you're a mum, you're there's so many different roles. But in when you're on when we used to go on the planes, and if there was ever an issue and the oxygen mask came down, you'd put it on yourself first, because self-care is not selfish. Self-care is where that starts. So what does your self-care, what does your resilience strategies look like? And the quickest win is around sleep. If I said to you 0 to 100 to rate yourself, rate where you are on the scale 0 to 100 of how you can rate yourself, how stressed you are, or you can rate how much effort do I put into my self-care, or you can rate how well you are. You can rate anything. You can rate levels of anger that you have, levels of hope, but you rate your well-being. Rate your well-being. And if say you're a 60, your rate of well-being, then the question is, what can you do to shift that by 10%? How can you move that up? How can you enhance that resilience? What can you do? And we'll get into this, but so it's a challenging. I'm challenging you to ask the question: how important is self-care? What is self-care? The quickest win to your resilience. I work with the fire service personnel, and I believe that we plug our batteries in on our phones every night. Quite often we don't plug ourselves in terms of resetting, getting relaxation. And what would that look like for you? And the quickest win to your resilience is sleep. We're a totally sleep deprived nation. We're not getting enough sleep. We're bringing phones and technologies into the room. The bedroom is for sleep and sex. They're the two things that the bedroom is for. Get an old-fashioned alarm clock and try and score some snore, because honestly, sleep is your quickest win to boosting your resilience. Physical exercise, I talked about the benefits of that. One of the interesting areas is what we call the power of the green and the power of the blue. The power of the green is the impact of nature, and being out in the woods, forests, in fields. So trying to identify, it has a calming and soothing effect on our autonomic and nervous system, which sort of deregulates us and brings us into a different space. Similarly with the power of the blue, whether it's sea, lakes, or river. I'm stuck in the middle of the country. You probably figured out now. I have a big bogger accent from County Laois. So, but there's a lake beside us and a river beside us, and that's the space that we go, or I go, in terms of connecting with nature. So what are you doing? What else are you doing around self-care, around nutrition, around relationships with others, around keeping the communication open? And one of the interesting things in the world of psychology is that for many years we've looked at things that we're often referred individuals. What's wrong with this person? The type of deficit orientated. What's wrong with this person? What is wrong going on here? But actually, only the last 20 to 30 years have we started looking at how come well people keep well? What do they do? And one of the interesting areas of this is around blue zones. Or if you want to look more up on this, is Martin Seligman, Authentic Happiness. And it's very interesting. What keeps well people well? What would a life of pleasure, meaning, and engagement look like for you? Because this is like a dynamo. Well-being, it's Wellbeing Wednesday, or well-being. Well-being is not the absence of depression, anxiety, and negative emotional states. Well-being is about zest, energy, power, love, all the really strong zest, really strong emotions. So what can drive that? What can be the dynamo that drives that? What can be the dynamo that drives pleasure, meaning, and engagement? And one of the things around that is pleasure. So if I now, through the power of magic and virtual the world and a little bit of magical thinking, which is all nice and help creative thinking, if I brought you all a 99 cone. So a 99 cone has chocolate, and it's a cone, and you can have sprinkles, and you can have raspberry or whatever you want on a strawberry or chocolate. So you're savoring that cone, okay? You're savoring that cone. And I bring you a second one straight away. And I give you a third one. You'll probably find that the pleasure effect is falling, because pleasure is short lasting, but meaning and engagement is what sustains our well-being. So we can have many pleasures, but they're short lasting. I can think of world leaders now who life is all about pleasure, but not really about meaning and engagement. And so what gives us meaning and engagement? And there's a number of different pathways to that. One is through education, like a love of learning. And for some people that might be doing adult education, doing a virtual book group, it can be, reading, can be doing actual formal education or self-learning. It could be whatever, learning to do a garden. So learning and education acts as one of those pillars when it comes to our well-being. The other one is then about being good to others, the volunteering. When we volunteer and give to others, it hits on all our different hormones and neurotransmitters, the serotonin, which increases our motivation, our oxytocin, which increases our love and connection with others, and all the endorphins that make us feel good after we. So volunteering, we know people who volunteer, and volunteerireland.ie is another great website, great resource, and you can select like whether it's volunteering around social justice or around children or around animals or around the environment. There's different areas you might want to look at that area. What we know is that it really impacts on your wellness. And what's your passions in your life? Have you got passions? Often I ask people what their passions in their life, and I've heard some incredible passions. People are into running, walking, yoga, meditation, friends, glass of wine, they're building robots, bell ringers, loads of different. And there's a lot of people who don't have passions. If you don't, because when I do this work in the real time with companies and ask this, about 50% of people actually don't have passions. And it's okay. So you've got to see the world like a menu and then go, I'm going to try and develop passions, because the passions are something that sustains our well-being. What are your passions? Have you got enough passions? Are you changing? Are you switching it up? Are you orientated towards change? In this world, the biggest change has ever been put on us in the context of this pandemic, where we all were traveling one road and now we're in a different pathway, being orientated towards change. So education, giving to ourselves, investing time in ourselves around self-gratitude, maybe looking at the whole area of mindfulness. The most evidence-based mindfulness program we can do is MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. John Kabat-Zinn, it's an 8-week program. It's available right throughout Ireland. And if you really want to invest a bit of time in yourself, then MBSR is the evidence-based program. And then finding another part for the whole area of well-being is finding meaning beyond ourselves, finding something beyond ourselves. And for some people, that is faith, and for other people, that's an appreciation of nature and awe and the beauty that nature can bring. One of the areas there's 9 areas in the world called the blue zones. Very interesting. We look up the Wikipedia, the blue zones. Dan Buettner, and on part of Operation Transformation, I went out to Minnesota. They were communities were trying to mimic a blue zone. Something maybe the Sandiford, I think, might look at in the future is how can you create an environment that's a blue zone. And the current blue zones, there are 5 of them. One is in Loma Linda in America, there's in Sardinia, in Greece. The others just escape me at the moment. But there was 9 features of people. The blue zones are where people live the longest and the healthiest in the world. They've Okinawa is another one in Japan. They've the most amount of people who live well into their 100 years. So they live a very long life, very healthy life, with great mobility, great connection with their friends. And they look at different tenets to keep that. Some is around physical movement, around plant slant, less meat, more plant in their diet, alcohol a little bit in moderation, faith and spirituality, friendships. So lots of different areas there. And so you can look in your own life, like how are you linking in with the well-being? Is well-being, it's all vogue work now, but are you embedding well-being as part of your life? And how we link with relationships in your life, how you set boundaries. Can you say no to requests? These are all critically important. So my desire for you, and I really appreciate if you've looked at this, is that you live a life of pleasure, meaning, and engagement. That you ask yourself, what would I do if I was not afraid? And also that you're able to put self-care into the center of your day. Thank you very much.
Dr. Eddie Murphy, thank you so much. It was a very interesting topic. I can relate to a lot of what you said. Like you mentioned, flying and panic attacks. Over the last number of years, for whatever reason, I myself I haven't developed a fear of flying, but I tend to, I suppose they are panic attacks when I get on the plane, because I'm claustrophobic, and I will always, once I'm on the plane, I will have a sort of mental battle with myself about remaining on the plane. And it'll go through my head about what other ways I can get home from that country instead of flying. And it's mentally and actually physically quite draining. And no one will probably ever sit beside me on a plane ever again. But it's
one of the features of that, Conor, first of all, is, I think there you are now. You've just talked openly about something, and this is how we break down any stigma around mental health, or that having open conversations, and having, in any organization, area, community, having people who are able to talk openly about their experiences. It's a very powerful thing, because it opens up the conversation for the next person. And if you think about that, because fundamentally what you're saying is, if you're thinking about an upcoming flight, or you've just arrived and you're thinking of your return flight, it's impacting on the quality of your time there, and it's quite distressing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you how bad it actually got. Our family holiday would be dictated by the seat I could get on the plane. So I'd only sit on 2 seats on a plane. If we couldn't get those, well, then we didn't go to that country for holiday. But now I've learned to manage it through, distracting myself and sort of breathing techniques, and sort of building up to it and sort of calming myself down. I'm not fully over it, but I suppose I can cope with it. I expect it, I can cope with it, and I suppose it's a work in progress.
And what I would say there is, if you start going into the avoidance mode, you're feeding the fear. You're strengthening the muscle of the fear by doing what you're doing, which is doing the opposite of avoidance. And it doesn't have to be plain, like if other people are watching this, that the opposite of, and doing what you fear, you're actually taking control and you're empowering yourself more. And that just takes me a little bit into the COVID situation and concerns and fears and stress. And for example, if you think about a circle of our concern, our circle of influence, and our circle of control, quite often when we're in this current pandemic, when we're feeling stressed and anxious, quite often we're in that circle of concern. And what I'd ask people to do is move down into the circle of control. What you can control is your space, face covering, hand washing, cough etiquette, reduced visitations. And when you start moving into what you can control, then you're going to the reality is you will be less distressed.
Yeah. Good advice. One of those, we have a number of questions in, but they all have one theme, and it's around remote working. You touched on it earlier on. People, we're social beings. People like to come to the office. They interact with people, their team, on a day-to-day basis. Now they're at home. They're starting to feel lonely. What are the key signs to look out for is one question. And I suppose if people, I suppose, need to ask themselves why they're unhappy as well. That's another sort of theme.
Why are they unhappy?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just take the two then. Well, first of all, the remote working, like it's been foisted upon people, and I think it's understanding that well, first of all, I think it's really important that the environment is set up for home working, right? That you structure the environment as best you can, because not everybody has a home office or they like have kids can running in and out, and I think employers have a level of forgiveness around that. But I think if you're team leader or individual yourself and you're feeling disconnected from the team, then I think you just have to work that little bit harder on ensuring that you're reconnecting with your team and your to ensure that that level of isolation, that you're still engaged in networking, that you're still engaged with the community within your organization to try and reduce that isolation. I mean, that's critically important. And if you're talking about what was the second part of that?
Well, I suppose the key signs for people to look out for, and if someone is unhappy, I suppose they should be asking themselves why they are unhappy. If a person has always been happy, now they're unhappy, I suppose there's something is called.
But there's a couple of bits. Okay, so this is about change. I'm going to put this into a topic of change, right? And the person unhappy. Just explain that. So someone was happy and now they're not. But quite often, there's a really brilliant book. If you want to invest an hour of your time and you're looking at this, it's called Who Moved My Cheese? It's a fabulous book, and many people have read it. It's sort of given out in management circles. But Who Moved My Cheese is a story of two mice and two men. And I won't give it all away now, but in that story, the men and the mice go to a cheese station every day. And one day they arrive and the cheese is all gone. And the cheese represents what they want in life: their finance, their love, their relationship. And the mice, because they don't have complex brains, they put on their runners and they go back into the maze of life, and they work through it and they find new cheese eventually. Whereas hem and haw are the two men, and one gets frozen and stuck and gets quite angry and resentful. And the other one is sort of fearful because he has to step out into the maze. But the key takeaway here is about our orientation towards change. If you're stuck and you feel your mood is shifted because of this pandemic, if you are seeking to return to that old life, as it were, where everything was in its place, everything, you went to work, family went to school, everybody was well, that's gone. Life has changed. And an orientation towards change, and it'll change again, and it'll change again, and it'll change again. So orientating ourselves as person, I mean, there's lots of companies going to work here and work in Sanford Business Park, and change, if they're doing what they're doing. I do a whole module on change leadership and change management. But if you're a company, your company will be doing something different in 5 years' time, 3 years' time than it will be today. Because companies that learn and grow are the ones that thrive. And similarly, for an individual to thrive is about learning, growing, and being adaptable to change.
Yeah, I suppose that's the key thing. Is we need to be open to change. We don't, to certain things that we don't have control over, we never will. But it's being adaptable, open to change, and flexible, because COVID, the pandemic, is constantly evolving. So we need to be adaptable. Dr. Eddie Murphy, I'm just conscious of the time. I want to thank you so much for your talk today. It's really, really interesting. It's very relevant to a lot of people, especially now during the pandemic. I've taken a lot away from it, and I'll be applying some of it in my own life. You can stay up to date on everything happening in Sandyford and sandyford.ie. You can look at this webinar event with Dr. Eddie Murphy on our website, sandyford.ie, and any other event that we've held throughout Wellness Week. And we have more events taking place tomorrow and Friday. So again, sandyford.ie for further details. So Dr. Eddie Murphy, thank you again for your time. Thank you to everybody for joining us today, and stay safe.